Hello and welcome to the Unstuck movement. I am your host, Rob Z. This platform was created to help you break those chains that are holding you back in your life personally and professionally. Today, we have an incredible guest with us, Lisa Sugarman. Today, we're going to be talking grief, healing, suicide, mental health, resilience, and finding those breakthroughs in our lives. And Lisa, I love to ask powerful questions right off the jump. And I'm so fascinated to hear this story and to hear your story. But how did you learn about your father's suicide 35 years later after it happened?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Rob. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad to be here. So as far as my story is concerned, it's a little unusual. So you said it yourself. 35 years later, I found out the truth. So when I was 10 years old, I lost my father. He was a fit, healthy, outgoing guy. No signals that anything was wrong with him in any way at all. One day he was there, one day he wasn't there. And what I was told was that he had died of a heart attack. I was away. It was the summer. I was away at day camp for the day. Everything happened while I was at camp. I came home and he was gone. And so for 35 years, that was the story that I lived with, that he had died in his sleep of a heart attack. Had no reason to question that story. He was a smoker. It was the late 70s. It all made sense to me. And then flash forward 35 years. Now I'm 45 years old, the same age my father was when he passed away. And I learned very much by accident, just was a conversation, just a super innocuous conversation with a cousin that I hadn't seen for a long time. She started asking me about my kids, who at the time I think were, teenagers, teens, tweens. And out of the blue, out of the clear blue sky, she asked me if I had noticed any of the same mental illness in our kids that my father had. And I had no idea what she was talking about. It was, complete, like pull the pin on the grenade and throw it. And I didn't even know how to respond in that moment. I think I was just so completely caught off guard. My husband luckily happened to be with me and was kind of giving me the look across the table, like, what is she talking about? What's happening? And I didn't really address it in that moment because I think I really just didn't know how to address it. So I just kind of let it go. And my cousin went on and talked about something else. But the very next day, I saw my mother. And I wasn't really planning on asking her any specific questions. It gave me pause, but it didn't cause me to start wondering, like, what didn't I know? It never occurred to me, what didn't I know? But she and I were talking the very next day and just kind of reminiscing and just a typical conversation. And out of absolutely nowhere, I asked if my father had been depressed before he died. And she said yes. And that was never a conversation that we had talked about before. And there was no reason to ask that question. And then before I even knew the words came out of my mouth, I was asking her if my father had taken his life. And she said yes. So I lost him twice. Yeah.
How did learning that information 35 years later, how did that change everything?
I mean, in so many ways for me in that moment, let's put it this way. I realized that in a lot of ways, it didn't change anything. It didn't change the beautiful memories and moments. I had a beautiful childhood. I have nothing but joyful memories of being a kid. I was an only child. My dad was my best friend. I loved my parents. I had a very full and happy life. So it didn't negate any of those memories. It didn't change the fact that I came from a loving home and my parents adored me and I knew that and I felt that every day. But it did change everything at the same time because it kind of instantly made me question everything. It made me question every experience I had with my father. Like, we were big mountain climbers. He was a big outdoorsman and we would do a ton of hiking and we were up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire and always out and active. And now it just kind of had me replaying my whole childhood, wondering, how much of that was manufactured? Was it authentic? And, so in that way it changed. And I had always grown up with the belief system that suicide was selfish, which is a really common philosophy that a lot of people have. It's kind of an internal belief system. And mine didn't come from anywhere. It didn't come from my parents. It didn't come from reading or learning anything. I did lose my cousin to suicide the year before my father passed away. So that was kind of my first experience with death and with suicide all kind of wrapped into one. And I just, on my own, felt like it was a very selfish thing to do for someone to leave instead of trying to help themselves or talk about what was going on. And I just carried that with me. So when I found out that my own father had died by suicide, it just, it shook me in a way that I didn't realize a person could be shook. You know what I mean? And it was, just so devastating to think that my father was suffering so silently, because you would never have imagined that he was struggling in any way. He was just rock solid in all the ways that you would ever think your dad would be. And my mother was unaware of anything. I was unaware of anything. And so it was kind of watching everything implode all in that one moment. Like everything that I knew to be true didn't feel true anymore.
Jeez Louise. Okay. So yeah, I can't imagine. Oh, man, that would just really throw you for a loop in so many different ways. It's finding out something so powerful so many years later, and you would have so many questions about yourself, about your family. It just, wow, so much would come up. Okay, so we're gonna dive into that. Before we go any further, though, I just want to welcome people here. So the Unstuck movement, we created the platform to have true stories, true testimonies of breakthrough, people who have gone through incredibly difficult things and come out on the other side stronger, making their message to help other people and serve them. This story is no different. We're sponsored by the Connected Leaders Academy. Check out connectedleadersacademy.com. And also, if you want to launch your own platform, build your own brand, I'd love to help you. If you want to make a lasting impact on people's lives, you want to create incredible connections personally and professionally, I encourage you to launch your own podcast, because it can be game-changing for your own personal life, your own personal development, but also for your business and your brand. I'd love to help you with that. You can go to robzwentz.com and join our wait list for the Pro Podcaster Academy. Lisa Sugarman with us today is a mental health advocate, author, and founder of the HelpHUB, a free online resource for mental health support. A 3-time survivor of suicide loss, she works as a crisis counselor and storyteller to normalize conversations about mental illness, grief, and suicide prevention. When you say that most of society feels that suicide is selfish, that's, I know how that's common. My thought always is the person who commits suicide is thinking that they're helping other people because they're better off if they're not here, and they're gonna it's gonna be better for society if they're not here. Is that the approach that you've taken when it comes to somebody who's, I mean, I know every story is different. Different people go through different things, but for me, that's always been the perception that they've been struggling so much, and they've convinced themselves to be better off if they just weren't here. It's not really a selfish thing. It's more of in their mind, a selfless thing. Am I thinking of that correctly, or how do you take that?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. You're right in all the ways that you're thinking about it. I mean, all of those things apply. I mean, it's so situational. It really depends on the person and kind of the thought loops that they're stuck in, because that's the biggest thing that happens. Any of us going through anything, whatever degree we're going through it, it doesn't have to be, a crisis situation to kind of be wrapped around the axle about things. It could just be stress at work. It could be a relationship, family, and getting stuck in our own heads without the perspective of someone else, or without being able to have any other outside influences. It keeps those negative thought patterns going. It perpetuates those. And so it makes it really, really hard to break out of that place. And that's what most people who reach that point, most people who start off feeling depressed or sad or hopeless, and then kind of evolve to a place of, well, I don't see any way out of how I feel. They're not choosing suicide because they want to leave their families, or they want to leave their life necessarily, or they want to leave this world. They do it because there's just, in their mind, there's just no other way to end the pain. They're in pain and they want that to stop. And they've lost enough control in their life that this is the only thing that they have control over. So it's the choice that they make because it's the only choice that they have available to make to stop, being in such pain. And so it's a difficult situation. That's one of the reasons why it's so important one of the many reasons why it's so important to talk about how you're feeling, to let other people know there's an issue, because people can't help you if they don't know something's wrong.
Yeah.
That was the case with my father. He was one of those people who fell into that, kind of into that category of looked great on the outside and all the optics were aligned and perfect. And then on the inside, he was obviously suffering in a way that nobody knew. So it's by sharing how we're feeling and being a little vulnerable and asking people for help that we can kind of break that cycle. That's how we change things.
Yeah. And I mean, anybody who's been depressed knows like that isolation is so real. You start to isolate yourself because it's oh man, the isolation can be really, really, it becomes such a real thing. And I don't know. I've done it, probably twice in my life where I've gone in like this heavy isolation, and I'm like, I know I shouldn't be isolating myself, but at the same time, it's like it's the only thing I know how to do in that moment. And through the process, thank God I came out on the other side of like going and getting help, talking about the issue. But it's almost like I had to go through a period of isolation to like work through the thing. But that isolation can take on a life of its own and then just perpetuate itself. And so getting outside of that isolation can be one of the most difficult things to do. So if you have somebody in your life who is isolating themselves, I'm not even going to say suicidal, they're just isolating themselves, how do you come up from the outside and break through that? Because it can be very hard to get through to somebody who is in isolation.
Yeah, it is difficult. And once again, it's like, it depends on the person. It depends on the situation. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, whether you're a crisis counselor, whether you're a family member, whether you're a friend, you want to be there to help your person, whoever it is that's isolated or whoever it is that's struggling. But it's not our responsibility to fix the person. Like they have to do that work. So approaching it from that perspective, you can only do what you can do, which is to really try and connect the best you can with that person, whether you're checking in every day and texting them and sending them a, hey, what's going on for the day? What are you up to today? What's your plan? Can you step out and take a walk? Do you want to go for lunch? Put the offer out there. Try and get that person to re-engage, whether it be, re-engage socially or emotionally, or just have a conversation. And I mean, just saying to somebody outright, are you okay? Like, I'm worried. Are you okay? Are you in a bad place? Are you thinking of harming yourself? And if you're really worried, if somebody's behavior has changed and maybe they're doing more than just isolating, maybe you work with someone and you notice that they're calling out often, they're not showing up in the same ways they used to, their performance is suffering, then you can absolutely say, are you thinking about, or have you been thinking about harming yourself? And those are the words that we have to use. That's how direct we really need to be, because we can't afford to tiptoe around a mental health crisis. We have to just kind of attack it directly. So I think the biggest thing is just to offer as many options. If you know that person loves to eat out, or loves to go hiking, or loves to bike, like any of the things that the person likes to do, just try and reach them wherever they are. Meet them where they are to do those things.
Yeah, you're making me think right now of somebody in my life that I know who's definitely been isolating for a while, and we have a few common things we love to do, and so I'll touch base with them, and they'll be distant, take them a while to get back to me, or they won't call me back, or whatever the thing might be. And it's been going on for a couple of months, and I really should just be like, hey, this is what I'm gonna go do. Come out and pick you up. We'll go do this, and just make that connection, because it can be easy. It's so easy not to do it, and it's so easy to think, well, I've tried. I reached out. They're not reciprocating. So I don't want to, and I think this is true too. People don't want to be a bother. I don't want to bug somebody.
Right. Right. And you want to respect somebody's boundaries too. But that's why it's a fine line. Like, it's hard to know sometimes when it's an issue of somebody just, maybe they're in a really busy period in their life. Maybe they've got a lot of obligations, or maybe they've got a project they're working on, or maybe they're not well. Maybe they're not feeling well. Maybe they've just been dealing with illness and they're private and they don't want to share it. But,
Yeah.
It's hard to know when to push and when not to push, but at least reaching out and connecting in some way is better than none at all.
Yeah, it's better to be more of a nuisance than less of a nuisance if you feel
Yeah.
like something's wrong.
Yeah. And you can always say, look, I don't want to bug you, but I care about you. You're a friend. You're somebody, that means something to me. And I feel like something might be off.
So who were you before you learned this information about your dad, and who were you after? Like, what were you doing, professionally? What were you doing professionally after and before? Was there a drastic change whenever this information was presented to you?
There was a big, big shift. Yeah. For me, I've always been a content creator. I've always been a writer. I've been writing for magazines and newspapers forever. I was in the parenting space. Like when my kids were probably in grammar school, maybe middle school, that's when my career kind of shifted in terms of, being a newspaper writer and creating that kind of content. I started writing parenting books and got aligned with a publishing company in California that liked my work. And so we wrote a bunch of books together. And so I was in that space. I was embedded in that space because my kids were young. We were, my husband was doing a lot of international travel. So it was a lot of this navigating work-life balance. I worked in the school system. So it was kind of all the things that form family life, just how to navigate all of that. And I did it from a perspective of, not worrying about being perfect, like the perfectly imperfectness of all of it. So that was kind of my niche. And I did that for a dozen years and I loved working in that space. And then all of a sudden, kind of in the middle of all that, I learned that my dad had actually died by suicide, and it just blew me up. It completely blew me up. And I really did stop creating content for a while, for at least a handful of years, because I just, my heart wasn't in it. I was distracted. I was trying to get my bearings. I felt very like when you're in a free fall, I just felt like what I had known to be true for so long wasn't. So what else isn't true? You know what I mean? It's just like your mind just kind of goes in a different direction every day. And once I got my bearings again, and I started thinking about, getting back to doing what I was doing, I was like, I really just don't feel like it's authentic anymore that I do the work that I had been doing before. I really feel like I need to do something with this lived experience, to do something. Like we all have a story to share. And I felt like I needed to do something with this story. And the irony is I was invited onto a podcast, and I had been doing tons of podcast interviews just in the parenting space, but I had decided to just make a public post. It was the first time I'd ever acknowledged that my dad had passed away by suicide. And it was for like International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. It was for that one acknowledgement day. And I wrote a post, and I'd never spoken about it before publicly. And someone saw it in Canada, a woman who has a podcast, a very successful podcast about suicide and loss in Canada, saw it and reached out to me and asked if I would ever be interested in coming on her podcast to talk about my father's story. I had never even considered it, was never planning on it. And I said yes. And I have not stopped since. And that one podcast episode turned into writing about it, turned into speaking about it, turned into becoming a crisis counselor, turned into launching my own podcast that dropped 2 weeks ago. I've written a new book that now is the memoir of my father's suicide and losing him twice. And so it just kind of started this massive domino, this domino effect. And now this is where I am now. I've dedicated every bit of my time to being a mental health advocate and sharing my story and creating platforms like the HelpHUB to get people connected with the resources that they need when they're struggling. So yeah, it is definitely a very different kind of a career path, but I can't imagine doing anything else.
I think there's something really important too. You said about getting your bearings straight. And I think when something really pivotal happens in our life, there's a cause for pause where you're just like, okay, I just got to get myself together here. And that could take a day, that could take a month, that could take a year, it could, it could take a decade. There's no real time limit on it, but it's so true. And I think a lot of times, and I guess everybody's different on their path and what they're supposed to be doing, but a lot of times you might have this really big thing happen to you, but you might not take the time to put the pause in, and you also might not pivot during the pause. And I think hearing your story there, that you had this happen, it created like a fork in the road, and you took a long time to sort that out for yourself, and then decided to leave behind what you had been doing to do this new thing. You know, that we have a choice there, and that's a brave choice, because it's not only are you understanding a new identity that you're living in, but everybody around you who knew you for what you did before is now experiencing a new you with a new identity. And it's vulnerable to come out and talk about that thing. And I'm sure it was not easy to put that post out on Facebook. I'm sure it took a while to get there.
It did. It did, but it's interesting because once I did do it, I've never felt any shame whatsoever about my father's suicide or any of the other people I've lost to suicide. Once I started talking about it, once I experienced kind of the byproduct of that vulnerability, everything changed for me. Everything just came completely into focus for me. And like you said, it doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen right away. It's a process. It's very different for everybody. Some people never get to a point where they feel like they need to take what they've been through and use it in different ways like that. And you know, that's entirely someone's choice. That's a very personal decision. In my case, I just felt empowered to do that for the benefit of other people who might be able to get something meaningful out of my story, or hear something that I had done that was helpful to me to maybe overcome pieces of it, or you know, reach different places in that whole process, in that whole journey. So once I started talking, it was like I couldn't imagine not doing it.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, cool in the sense of like embracing the purpose of what happened, of what's going on in your life, and then fully like stepping into it. Like, I know this is something, because so many times somebody will feel that purpose or that pull and they won't do anything about it.
Right.
And so that's huge. And so real quick, we got to shout out the sponsor of the podcast. When we come back in 1 minute, though, I want to go deeper into this topic because you had mentioned when I was going through our information about the episode that it can be harmful to say committed suicide. So why is that harmful? How should we say it? And saying it differently, how does that give us a different view on what it is? I'm curious about that. We'll talk about that in 1 minute. Are you struggling to make consistent, valuable content for yourself? Do you want to have an efficient and effective way to create content that attracts the people that you want to connect with in life, the people you want to build relationships with in business? Do you want to be the go-to authority at what you do, at what you're great at? Would it be helpful for you if you had a platform that connects you to incredible people in your industry? The kind of platform that gets you leads and lands you clients without you having to beat down anybody's door or blow up anybody's inbox. Whether you're already creating content or you're desiring to start and it's something that's been kind of burning inside of you for a while, I urge you and encourage you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Get started right now. Join the waitlist at robzwentz.com.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world globally. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, join the Connected Leaders Academy today. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JASCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So, Lisa, loving this conversation. Really good. Talking about the term committed suicide and your thoughts on that being harmful. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, sorry, I'm thinking I'm having a little bit of technical trouble here. My screen.
Yeah, I can. Your screen shut off there, but I can still hear you either way. So
can you? Okay. Yeah. So what people don't realize is that when you say committed suicide, like take the word committed out of the phrase committed suicide, and when you take the word committed and you isolate that word and you think about that word and the meaning of it, it's a negative connotation, right? Like
Mhm.
there's always a negative connotation. It conjures up things like, committed a sin or committed a crime, and it inevitably just gives you this impression that the person who has taken their life has done something wrong or something illegal or something immoral, and it typecasts that person. And it's just really unfortunate because when that happens, all of a sudden it's creating the stigma around that person in a very unfair way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I also think of, like, being committed in a relationship or something like that as being like really sticking to something. But then again, being really committed to something negative, it's a just saying that's like hard to swallow, kind of like that person was so committed to not wanting to live anymore, because that's what commit. You know what I mean? So that's where my head
Yeah.
kind of goes to, that doesn't feel good.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And so part of what we have to think about within the kind of bigger, broader mental health community, which is why this has been a very deliberate decision by people within the mental health community, we have to think about the word choice that we use when we talk about things like suicide in particular. And we have to understand that the perceptions that people have around those things start with the words that we use to describe them. So when we take out the word committed and instead replace it by dying by suicide or ending their life or suiciding, which is something that's become more mainstream lately, we're giving the person who did end their life the dignity that they deserve, because they didn't do anything wrong. They just got to a point where the pain that they were in, and this is what you and I were talking about before the break, the pain that they were in was just way too much for them to bear. And they didn't feel like they had any options. So they made that decision. But the bottom line is that they're afflicted with an illness, just like any other illness, just like cancer, just like heart disease. This is just a little bit of a different one because you can't see it in the ways that you can see those other illnesses.
100%. Yeah. It's just something that can't be diagnosed on a screen by a doctor, right? I mean, I guess you can see brain scans and things like that, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
When we're getting ready for this episode, I always ask for people's favorite quotes, and the quote that you gave me was, "We're all a work in progress."
Yeah.
Which I love that. Just thinking of yourself as a work in progress is so good, because it means that you're getting better. At least in my opinion, a work in progress is a good thing. So why is that a quote that you live by? Why is that so important to you?
So I think it just kind of highlights the fact that we're not only are we a work in progress, but we're all fallible. Like we're if we're working towards something, if we're evolving and if we're growing, it implies that also includes our imperfections, and we have to include those because we're not perfect beings. None of us are. And it just kind of gives us the freedom and the latitude to really explore who we are and embrace that whole process of just continuing to grow and to kind of add to ourselves and to, move forward in positive ways in our life.
I'm curious for you. So after learning this about your dad, did you throughout your life struggle with depression and things of that nature? Was that a struggle for you at any point? That was like, whenever you learned this information was like, oh, holy cow, I'm connecting some dots. Did that sort of thing happen?
It's interesting. I'm glad you asked that question because I've definitely had periods of time in my life where I've been uncertain about what I wanted to do with my future. I've had bouts of, anxiety, definitely have been depressed at certain points in my life. But I think the way that learning about my father's suicide really kind of crystallized things for me in myself, my feelings about myself. Like I had always had this knowing that I was wired differently. Like my husband and I always joke about it. And he says in particular that my emotional wiring, so to speak, is like, how it has electrical wiring has the little, covers around it. So you don't get, I don't have that. I don't have any of that. My wires are completely exposed. So whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I feel it all very, very deeply as an empath. And so for me, like, I knew I was wired differently, and I really just didn't understand why I always felt things so intensely, why I couldn't shut my brain off, things like that. I knew I wasn't depressed, like, as a constant state, but I knew that I just thought about things to such a deep degree that it was just very heavy for me all the time. And
Mm.
it was when I found out that my father had been dealing with mental illness, and that stuff, look, that's hereditary. That inherited trauma, that inherited DNA is a part of who we are. And
Yeah.
so the way that the cocktail mixed up in me, is that it just made me a very highly sensitive person. And in a way, it was a weird experience. Like, in a way, it was almost a relief, if that makes any sense. Like,
Yeah.
I knew what I was, but I knew what I wasn't. And I knew that I loved my life, and I was passionate about that life, and I didn't want to leave that life, but that I also felt life very deeply. So in some weird ways, it just kind of clarified a lot of things for me.
It sounded like you had an outlet, and you gave yourself permission to talk about it, though. And your
Hmm.
dad probably was a highly sensitive person also,
Hmm. Yeah,
but
he was.
didn't feel like he had permission to open up about it, and, like, giving himself permission to do it.
Yeah, I think that there were so many factors where my dad was concerned. Like, my mom and my dad, I spoke about this in the very beginning of our conversation, that my parents were just, like, beautiful together. I woke up every morning for those 10 years when I had both of my parents. I woke up every single morning to the sounds of my parents just talking over coffee in the kitchen and laughing, and that would just filter down the hallway to my bedroom. And they had a beautiful relationship. And I know that my dad felt supported by my mother. The unfortunate thing is that my dad didn't feel supported by his family, which,
Hmm.
that's a whole different conversation. And unfortunately, my mother and my father came from two very, very, very different family environments. And my mother got all the love and all the support and nurturing, and my father got none of it. And he was the youngest, and he was always judged for whatever he did. All he ever wanted to do was the best job he could do for the benefit of his family, and none of it was ever recognized. And so it was really, really, it was hard. And so at the very, very end of my father's life, my mother told me that within the last month or so of his life, she knew that he was down, but she didn't know to what extent. And he had actually told her that he started seeing a therapist. But
Hmm.
I mean, the outcome of that is clear. It was not the right person, or it was not for long enough. Whatever the reason was, it wasn't enough to help him. So
Yeah.
it's, it's just a sad outcome.
Yeah. And I'm so sorry, by the way. I mean, I know
Thank you.
that's easy to say, but yeah, hearing
No,
this sort of
I
stuff,
appreciate it.
it really does hit, because I too, I don't know if you can be diagnosed as a highly sensitive person, but I'm definitely
Mm,
highly sensitive, and
mm.
it's annoying. It's a gift and a curse, right?
Exactly.
But you've
Yeah.
got to use it to your advantage, right? So you talked about nurturing.
Mm.
Like, how do you nurture yourself as a highly sensitive person? Because I know a lot of that term is much more used now than it used to be. I don't know, because we're
Yeah.
allowed to talk about sensitivity now and vulnerability, and it's like, okay,
Yep.
it's like much more accepted, I should say.
Yeah.
So are there ways you recommend, if you are a highly sensitive kind of person, that you nurture yourself in unique ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my brain is flooded with them right now, because I just think of my own life and the things that I do. One of the things that I've really done, I think, that has helped me to really nurture that part of myself, is to create boundaries, which I never really did. I didn't do a lot of that, historically speaking, as a young adult, even young mother with kids and with a family and working and having all the different relationships that we have in life. I never, ever, ever said no to anyone else except me,
Mm.
unfortunately. And in doing that, it creates just a lot of unnecessary stress, because you feel like you've got a million balls in the air, and the ones that you really want to be carrying for yourself are kind of sitting on the floor. And so I really have worked super hard the last couple of years in establishing boundaries and maintaining those boundaries. And I have like a list of non-negotiables now, things that are important for my own well-being, not only as an empathic person, because empathic people, like, we get worn down by the intensity of the things that we feel all the time, and kind of carrying other people's stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I give myself a lot of grace now to be able to put that down and have a different philosophy now, which is more like, it isn't my responsibility. I recognize now that it's not my responsibility to fix or manage everybody else's stuff. And being able to recognize that and step back from that and say, I can be there to help, but to a point, has really had a huge impact on my own, like, nurturing of that side of myself.
Yeah, that is huge. Boundaries are so important. And like you said, when you're sensitive, like, just a normal day can be exhausting because of all the different things that you're managing inside of your head that you don't necessarily have to manage, but you are, because of how you are. So I can understand what you're saying there, and also I think too, something that there's some people in my life that they're not going to change, but I want to have a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. It's like needing to have acceptance of who people are, but knowing, okay, I want to have a relationship with them. That doesn't mean they're going to reciprocate. That doesn't mean they're going to be the ones who reach out to me. And I need to have boundaries, right? But I also need to know, and I don't know if this makes sense or not, it makes sense to me, that I'm doing my part because I know it's the right thing to do. I can't let the way I feel be determined by how they act, because they're not going to act the way that I would want them to, or how anybody would normally act in a healthy situation. So I have to accept that and be okay with that, but also know that I still have to put work in because it's the right thing for me to do. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes perfect sense. It makes absolutely perfect sense. And I've been there in my life, in my relationships, both personal and professional and family relationships, so many, many, many times. And it's really hard to get to that point where you have to just kind of let someone be who they are and how they are, and respect the fact that everyone's love language is different. Everyone shows up in a different way. Everyone, will reach out and stay connected in so many different ways. And it's giving that person the permission, in a way, to do that on their terms, in that way, as long as you're okay with what you're getting from them. Like, now this is what you have to tell me if this makes sense. So we have the right to respond to whatever anybody says and does in our own way, but we can't control what they say or do. So as long as we're comfortable with whatever that person in our life is giving to us, and we can make that value judgment, like, okay, it's maybe not happening the way I want it to, and they're maybe not showing up exactly the way I need them to, but they're showing up in the way that they have the capacity to show up, and that means something. So you kind of weigh it out, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I've come more to terms with. It's kind of that whole let them theory. I don't know if you're a Mel Robbins fan, but I'm a huge Mel Robbins fan. And she has this whole new concept, philosophy, about just letting people be who they are, and you respond accordingly the way you need to respond. And I think that's kind of changed my life in terms of how I interact with the world.
Yeah. I do these six attitudes of brilliant communicators. And one of the attitudes that I use is being pliable. And so being pliable means that you're going to show up for people. If it's done the wrong way, you're a people pleaser,
right?
And you're bending to everybody and you're breaking for them. But I think of like leather. Good leather bends really well, but never changes who it is.
Yeah, I like
so
that.
It says the things it needs to say. It is who it. Leather is what it is, no matter how much you bend it. And so, when you were saying that, I thought about being pliable in the sense that I can bend to somebody, and because I want to show up for them, or I feel like it's important for me for whatever the situation. There's a million different variables, whatever the situation is, but I don't change who I am. When I start to change who I am, that's when things start to fall apart.
Exactly. And that's where the whole boundary piece comes in. and identifying what those non-negotiable things are for you in your life. And when you can do that, that's how you can achieve balance from person to person and from relationship to relationship, because you kind of know what you're getting in each circumstance and what you will and won't tolerate, and keeping kind of yourself at the heart of that, which empaths don't usually do. We keep all the other people at the heart of that. So, by doing that, we kind of retain agency, and that's powerful.
Yeah. And it's hard to do. So it's like a really good practice to do it, because it's not easy. It's like a struggle. So I really love it because it helps you to grow as a person. We all need to be growing. Like going back to what your quote said. I mean, it's so true. We're all a work in progress, and that progress should always be moving forward. So if somebody's watching this right now, loving what we're talking about, I would highly encourage them to get in contact with your platform. They can check out the mental health resources, support, and content are at thehelphub.co. Talk about that platform a little bit, why you started it, and how is it helping people?
So I started it not even a year ago, probably launched it about 6 months ago. And it was in response to, I guess, just being on the crisis lifeline. So I'm a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project on their crisis lifelines. And for anyone who doesn't know what the Trevor Project is, we are the largest LGBTQ focused crisis and suicide hotline on the planet. And we service youth ages 13 to 24 who are in any kind of crisis, whether it be emotional crisis, they're facing homelessness or addiction or coming out, and anything that constitutes a crisis, where they're on the lifelines for them. And one of the big things that I do, in addition to holding an awful lot of space, is putting people together with the resources that they need when they need them. Because when you're in a state of crisis or hopelessness or depression, the last thing in the world that you can do is try to figure out where to go to get the resources you need. You can't be doing research and making cold calls and scouring the internet. You just kind of need what you need when you need it. So I kind of started quietly accumulating a list of resources that I knew were out there in the world, big ones, small ones, and was adding them to my website, which was not the HelpHUB. It was just lisasugarman.com back in the day. And it was a place where I just kind of showcased my work. And I, little by little, was building up this big resource page, and it became so unwieldy because I found so many resources that I didn't feel like people could access it and use it efficiently. So I kind of took a step back from it, and I just took it all down to the studs, and I rebuilt it as the HelpHUB, because I realized that this list of resources that was the value in my website. That's where the value was. So I broke it into different communities, like the BIPOC community, the LGBTQ community, Latinx community, veterans, elderly. There are 16 different categories where people can find resources that are unique to their specific needs. Like what you and I might need, or might be something very, very different than someone in the veterans community might need, or someone in the elderly community or the BIPOC community might need. Because even though we go through the same things, like grief or loss or hopelessness, we don't go through them in the same ways. So I created a place where you could find resources that match your needs in your community, all kind of under the same roof. And it's been gaining a lot of traction. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resources, and this content. I have all sorts of tools in a toolkit section. If you're having a grief attack, what do you do? If you know someone who you feel is suicidal, how do you talk to that person? There are questions that you can resource. If someone's grieving, what to say or what not to say. So all sorts of different types of content out there, including a YouTube channel, and my podcast, The Survivors, pipes through the website as well.
Amazing. Thank you for all that you do. That's incredible. So
you're welcome.
If they want those resources, thehelphub.co. And also, as I said earlier, if you want to launch your own platform, be the authority in your space, I'd love to help you with that. You can go to robzwentz.com. Lisa, this has been a wonderful conversation. Not an easy one to have, but such an important one to have. And I just want to honor you for being able to talk about it and using that story that you went through to help other people. I think it's incredible. Anything you want to leave our audience with before we sign off?
Oh, well, I want to say thank you so much for that. That means a lot, and I appreciate it so much. I think I would just say to anybody who's listening that you're not alone. I know there are a lot of people out there who feel very, very alone. They don't maybe have a partner or a family or a community. If you're one of those people who doesn't have someone to lean on, you're never actually alone. You can always pick up the phone and call 988 and talk to a crisis counselor like me who is trained to have the conversation that you need to have. There are places you can go to get resources. You know, Rob is so kind to feature the HelpHUB. Go there, find resources and connection there as well. And the way that you feel right now is not always the way you're going to feel. There's another side to it. So just reach out for help and let people know what's going on so that you can find what you need.
So true. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Another true testimony of breakthrough. Until next time, this has been the Unstuck Movement.